So, in the 19th century, you have these two massive world powers, Britain and the United States, passing these monumental laws to end slavery. And while we celebrate both of them as huge victories for freedom, the way they actually went down, well, their aftermaths tell two very different and really complex stories. I mean, it sounds like a simple question, doesn't it? You pass a law, people are set free, and you close a really dark chapter in history. But, when you really start digging into it, you find out it's anything but simple. The way you dismantle a system like this can leave behind legacies that stretch on for centuries. Okay, so first up, let's jump over to the British Empire. Back in 1833, Parliament passes the Slavery Abolition Act. This was a huge deal, often celebrated as this incredible moral high point in the nation's history. It was the law that officially put an end to slavery in most of the British colonies. And the scale here, it was just massive. We're talking about the emancipation of over 800,000 enslaved Africans across the Caribbean, South Africa, all over the empire. That's a staggering number of people, right? All legally declared free, just like that. So here's where it gets really interesting. How did the abolitionists actually get this thing passed? See, the thing is, the slave-owning class, they were incredibly powerful. They weren't just going to let this happen. So to get them on board, a deal was struck. The government agreed to pay up. They offered financial compensation to make the whole thing go through. And that brings up the million-dollar question, doesn't it? Who exactly got compensated? When you and I hear the word compensation connected to slavery, our minds immediately go to reparations, right? Payments to the victims of this horrific system. But that's not what happened here, not even close. The British government paid out, wait for it, 20 million pounds. Now, back in the 1830s, that was an unbelievable amount of money, a huge chunk of the entire government's yearly budget. And where did it all go? Every last penny went to the slave owners. It was compensation for their loss of property. And that property? Yeah, that was the human beings they had just been forced to free. And this right here, it just lays it out in the plainest, most brutal terms. You've got about 46,000 slave owners who get this massive financial payday. And the 800,000 men, women, and children who had suffered through it all, they got absolutely nothing. A big fat zero. So where did all that cash actually go? It wasn't like they were just handing out bags of gold coins. The whole thing was managed by the Bank of England. Big London banks and merchant firms, they were the middlemen, and you can bet they took their cut. The records show this money was quickly turned into cash and essentially pumped right into the heart of London's financial system. So the wealth built on slavery didn't just vanish. It was basically integrated, becoming part of the foundation of Britain's modern economy. All right, let's hop across the Atlantic now and fast forward about 32 years. In 1865, after a horribly bloody civil war, the US passes the 13th Amendment. And on the surface, this looks like a total, clear-cut win for freedom. But if you read the text, really read it, you'll find a pretty critical little catch. Okay, so here's the text itself. It says, "Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude shall exist within the United States." Sounds great. But then you get this one little phrase right there in the middle, "except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted." It seems so small, but scholars point out that its impact has been absolutely enormous. And that little phrase? Well, historians and legal scholars have a name for it, the exception clause. And what it did, essentially, was create a massive constitutional loophole. So while it did abolish the kind of slavery that existed for centuries, it left a door wide open for slavery and forced labor to continue, just as long as it was called criminal punishment. And you can see how this plays out over time. It's a direct line that many scholars have drawn. The amendment gets ratified in '65. Just a little over 10 years later, Reconstruction collapses, and suddenly you see Southern states passing all these discriminatory laws that specifically targeted newly freed African Americans. Then you fast forward into the 20th century. You get the war on drugs, and boom, that leads us right into the era of mass incarceration we're living in today. And the numbers today, well, they tell a pretty stark story. Take a look. Black people make up about 13% of the US population, but they're a full third, 33% of the prison population. The incarceration rate is just off the charts compared to other groups. For many scholars, this is the modern-day result, a direct consequence of that one little clause from 1865. Okay, so let's put these two stories side by side. We've got two major acts of abolition, right? Separated by a few decades and an entire ocean. But both of them left behind these incredibly powerful, long-lasting legacies that we can still see and feel today. And this really gets to the heart of it all. On one hand, you have the British abolition. What was the result? A giant financial windfall for the very people who had been doing the enslaving. That wealth gets absorbed and strengthens the whole country's economy. Then you have the American abolition, which creates this legal loophole that, many argue, just allowed a new kind of bondage to take root in the criminal justice system. Two totally different outcomes, and both are incredibly problematic. So what's the big takeaway here? I think it's that ending a system like slavery wasn't as simple as just flipping a switch. It wasn't this clean break from the past. Far from it. It was actually the messy, complicated, and really contested start of a whole new chapter. A chapter that was shaped by the very different ways these two countries decided to tear down that old institution. And that really leaves us with one big final question to think about. If these are the legacies we're left with, one that enriches the oppressors and another that leaves the door open for forced labor, then what does that word abolition truly mean? It's a tough question, but it's one that the histories of 1833 and 1865 really force us to ask ourselves.